All right, good morning. Let's get started with Workforce Go and editing timesheets. So for today's agenda, we'll be going through the payroll process, the difference between raw and calculated hours, viewing employee timesheets, editing the timesheets, including a couple of different ways how that can happen or why it would happen, mass editing timesheets, and then lastly, we'll go through personnel actions as it concerns our timesheets. So most of this is going to be presented with the audience of like timekeepers, supervisors, directors, personnel, program monitors. These are the types of responsibilities those people will be doing who has oversight over employee timesheets. So as I go through this, if you do have questions, please use the chat box on the bottom of your screen and we can answer those as we go through. In the registration form, I did ask some questions, and so I'll spend some time here showing this in Workforce Go. I asked, have you ever visited the Learning Center in Workforce Go? Of which 80% of us that answered said no. And do you use the helpful links button to search for Workforce Go online documentation, which 3/4 of us aren't using that either. So we're going to just start there very quickly to show you how to navigate there in Workforce Go. So while we're in Workforce Go, the Learning Center can be found by going to the menu. Let me make this larger so it might be easier to see. The menu in the upper left corner. And if you're in the My Info tab, which is the single silhouette, this is your information that you can access, which includes a help area and Learning Center. So depending on the security profile you have, the Learning Center will offer a different amount of training or different types of training. So if I go to show my learning journeys, this will list the available training that Workforce Go provides at no cost to any of the users. And we can see like different areas that I'm currently signed up for. You can enroll in a lot of different trainings that include timesheet editing, approving timesheets, and stuff related to the profile you've been assigned. And that's going to your information, help, and learning center. They have PDFs and videos and then on-screen demonstrations that you can see where they show how to perform these different tasks. There's an online documentation area that if we have questions and didn't want to go to the Learning Center, in the top right portion of our screen is a little processes circle with a question mark inside of it. If we click that, we can search the documentation from Workforce Go to look for whatever topic it is we're trying to research. And so like right here, I haven't typed anything, but it's already looking at most relevant stuff. Timesheets are here, different types of pay statements, different things that would be relevant to your access. And so you can use that search just like we're searching the table of contents of a book and looking for information about how Workforce Go works. The Learning Center is already queued to our user profiles, so there shouldn't be much else you have to do other than navigating there. So let's talk about the payroll process. This is an overview of our current pay period. So currently our pay period runs from July 7th to July 20th. During this pay period, our timesheets are being generated, we're working, we're using leave, maybe we're doing a change request because we forgot to punch out and we need to ask our supervisor or director for approval to add the punch out to our timesheet. Whatever's happening during this 2-week period to make sure our timesheets are accurate and correct to how we're working. When the pay period ends on July 20th, on July 21st, the day after that pay period, the program directors, timekeepers, supervisors are going to be responsible for reviewing the timesheets that were generated during this pay period. They'll make any necessary adjustments that has to be made, and then they can approve those timesheets. So that'd be Thursday, July 21st. Once those approvals are done, we have a finalized timesheet On Friday the 22nd, payroll is going to process time, and it's going to be based on those timesheet approvals. So however you've approved the timesheet, with someone with 80 hours, 40 hours, whatever it's supposed to be, payroll is going to take those timesheets and process them to build the payroll file. And during that same period, based on that payroll file that's been generated, payroll is then going to leave Workforce Go, go into our accounting system and move those expenses into our accounting system, and then start taking the processes and the steps necessary to fund the payroll account. And so this means on Friday, July 22nd, our paychecks and direct deposits are going to be created then, and then scheduled for release on the following Wednesday on July 27th. So it's important in this period that we're in now, and then that Thursday, the 21st, everybody has taken the steps necessary to finalize their timesheets. Because we want, when payroll processes, for all of our timesheets to be final, and we don't have to go back and make corrections. We don't have to void checks. We don't have to change whatever we're going to pay in taxes or our deductions. Any of that stuff gets affected if our timesheets aren't processed correctly and timely. During this period, any changes to timesheets after payroll has been processed may result in the original timesheet being processed, and the edits may not be included. So if we wait until Friday morning or Friday afternoon, or even Monday, the following Monday, to try and make an update to someone's timesheet, maybe they have leave that needed to be approved or something like that, or whatever adjustments being made, because we've made that adjustment late, payroll is going to process the timesheet at what it says when payroll is running time, not the time we did later. Payroll has to run this as soon as possible to ensure that there's enough time to fund the payroll account, to generate our paychecks, to schedule our direct deposits, and to manage payroll taxes. The data posted to Intact from Workforce Go relies heavily on how a timesheet's prepared, how our profiles are set up, and when the timesheet is put into place. So we're going to go over that. That's the personnel actions. We'll go through that at the end of this. So we can talk about raw versus calculated hours. And some of that I lifted from the personnel manual. Employees who are tardy more than the grace period are docked annual leave in quarter-hour increments. For example, an employee will forfeit a quarter-hour annual leave for late arrival of 6 minutes or more. So this is one of our pay calculation profiles that employees are assigned to. It's called standard auto pay, no early, no late, no auto lunch, or auto lunch. This is where the majority of tribal employees are assigned to this profile. And in that profile, it's set up how to adjust start time based on our punch-ins. So like for me, anytime I punch in before 8:05 a.m., so between midnight and 8:05, Workforce Go is automatically going to calculate that time as if it was punching in at 8 o'clock. And then this continues to go where if I punched in at 8:06, it's going to round that to 8:15 to match this policy from the personnel manual. And that continues to go on in those quarter-hour increments. So if you have questions about the rounding part of that, it links to our pay calculation, and then personnel can answer more about that if it's not calculating correctly, or we need to question why if we punch in at 8:08 it says 8:15. Raw hours are the actual hours an employee was on the clock. So like for me today, I punched in about 7:30. From 7:30 until 5, I will have been here 9.5 hours. That's going to calculate to be my raw time. The calculated hours are the hours calculated based on an employee's pay calculation profile. It's going to calculate my time as starting at 8 a.m., not 7:30. And I also have an hour unpaid lunch. So even though I have 9.5 hours on the clock as raw time, it's going to calculate my pay for the day at 8 hours. And we'll see that once we get into the timesheets here. But here's an example just illustrating exactly what I've said. The punch in was at 7:35, but it was calculated at 8 a.m. The punch out was at 5:01, calculated as 5 p.m. And there's the hour unpaid lunch from 12 to 1. So we have raw hours totaling 9.43, calculated time totaling 8 hours. So our raw hours do not necessarily have to match our calculated hours if our profile includes time that gets adjusted, like unpaid lunch hours, or our punch-ins getting rounded to the nearest quarter hour or hour, depending on the time that we've come in. So let's get into Workforce Go. Most of our home screens are going to look something like this. We might have different tabs across here. That's our dashboard where we can add more information that's accessible to us. But when we're navigating Workforce Go, it's always going to be by coming up here to the left corner to the menu. So if we're going to view our employees' timesheets, we're instead of the single silhouette, which is our own information, we're going to go to the double silhouette, where if we hover over it says team. So we're going to the team area. We can go to time, timesheets, and then we have some options. Do we want to see all timesheets, timesheets pending approval, by a pay period, current, all open, or even the timesheet approval history? So we're going to look at current timesheets to see the timesheets of this pay period. I have it defaulted to just show mine, but if you have employees assigned to you, when you come to this screen, you're going to see this list, but with those employees that are assigned to you. And we see some pretty generic information about the timesheet. It's waiting to be approved. It's open. Here's my employee ID. Here's the name. Here's how many raw hours so far have been on the clock. The time period, amount of calculated time, and then the checkbook I'm paid from. So a pretty basic view that we can see for all of our staff if we're looking through. On Thursday, July 21st, we can look at this list and determine the calculated hours to see if we have nothing but full-time employees, would this list have a bunch of employees at 80 hours? So a quick, easy way to spot check for any potential problems with our timesheets. We can also look to see if those employees assigned to us are people who are still employed in our program. If the PAs are slow and being circulated throughout the process that it goes through, and we have an employee that resigned, that person might still be listed as active and we'd see them listed. So that'd be our chance to say that Louis Moran is no longer in this department and we need to reach out to personnel and bring that to their attention. Also to make sure that person doesn't get paid if they didn't work during that time period. So for the individual timesheet, now that we can view the timesheet, we have options we can take. Are we going to edit, view the audit trail report of that timesheet to see what changes have been made during the pay period? Do we want to preview the timesheet or see employee information? Well, let's click on edit because now we want to get into the details of the timesheet. It's going to default to the current day while we're inside of the time period. If this is for a different pay period, I go backwards to the pay period before by just clicking the arrows at the top to change pay periods. It'll default to the last day of that pay period. So while we're in the current one, it stops right here on the current day. We can then use the arrows to change the days to view the different days in detail. Use our calendar to change the dates. We can see how our time's been calculated by coming here and see the detailed breakdown. So we can see Thursday, July 7th. Here's the time I was in, the time I clocked out, the raw time, and then how that got calculated out. 7:30 became 8 o'clock on the pay calculation. 5:04 became 5 p.m. on the pay calculation. And then I had the 1 hour unpaid lunch. So my 9.5 hours was calculated to be 8 hours of calculated time. And we would see that going through each of our employees' timesheet through the calculated time to see how that time is being calculated, whether it's including leave or just work hours throughout the timesheet. We can hit this date button to get rid of all the detail now and just see the summaries. So now we can see the 9.5 hours, the calculated break. There's my calculated time. And then the pay period total of the calculated time as it builds with each day in the pay period. We have the pay summary. That would just summarize all the different types of pay we have so far during the pay period. And then we can see summary by day for functionally the same thing as the calculated detail, with just less information on the screen. So that's our timesheet. And now we're ready to make an adjustment. If I had forgot to punch out today, and now we're looking at my timesheet and we see Friday, July 15th doesn't have an out time. So we now know that time can't be calculated for me because there's no from and to period for that to be calculated. We'd have to make an adjustment to the timesheet. If you have employees that are actively using Workforce Go, then we'd want to encourage them to use the change request option when they're viewing their timesheet. An employee can click change request and request to add a punch out. So I can say I need to add a punch out to 5 p.m. on 7/15. Leave a comment about why I didn't punch out on that day, and then submit that change, and it'll go to the supervisor or director for that to be approved and the change to automatically be added to timesheets. It's a great way to encourage your staff to keep informed about their time, and also to reduce your workload if you're editing a lot of timesheets. But if we are editing timesheets, it's as easy as going to the hour, typing the 5, and updating the period of time to now say from 7:30 to 5 p.m. We're adding that punch out, and then we can add a note if we need to about why we've edited the timesheet. And once we're finished adding that time, we can click save. Our timesheet will update with that and then calculate the time based on what we've entered. If I had left early this day, maybe I got unexpectedly sick, so now I don't have a punch out, and I'm gonna have sick hours. So I left at noon. Now we can add sick leave. So if the employee isn't gonna request leave, and you're not requesting leave on the employee's behalf, we might be filling in the rest of the timesheet to say from 1 to 5. We need it to be right, and we don't want it to be calculated as work time. We want it to be calculated as a type of time off. In this time off column, you'll have a drop down box. If you haven't used it before, it's just going to say browse. Otherwise, it'll save some options you've used before. All you have to do is click browse, and you'll be given a list of the types of time off available to the person. So you can scroll through. On the top, it tells us there's 20 on this screen with a total of 24. So I can page through to find the item that would be relevant, and then I can save the timesheet from here if this is how the timesheet was going to work for this day. And it can work the same way for unscheduled holidays or unscheduled admin leave. Just before the training started, SNETP had sent an email saying their office was closing for the afternoon. So if they have an unscheduled admin leave day, they can select that admin payout from this screen, and that would be admin for the second half of the day, where they would all be on the clock and then on admin leave. So that if we save the timesheet, the calculated detail is going to have the 4 hours of regular work and the 4 hours of admin. If we're looking at a timesheet that has the full punch in and punch out for a day or a group of days, if you had an employee that changed positions during the middle of the week, or their personnel action file wasn't processed until the middle of a pay period, it may be incumbent on us to have to make that change on the timesheet to say, well, LJ was in finance from July 7th until July 14th, but starting on Friday, he's working in the personnel office. So it's going to be the responsibility of the program to come to the timesheet and make that necessary change to any of the days that have been recorded before the person's profile was changed. So we can come here and update where that stuff's going to be. Personnel happens to be in the same checkbook, so we're not going to change checkbook 2, but we do need to change the program and the funding source. So if it's for this full day, I can click the drop down box. I'm going to hit browse if I haven't selected other programs before, so I can find the rest of the programs. And we're going to have to use the search bar to find the personnel office. You can scroll through. There's probably about 100 programs if you wanted to scroll through, or we can use the filter box that's located up here. So it's going to look for anything that starts with. So if I type the letters PE and then hit the refresh button, that's going to filter all the other programs out that doesn't start with PE like personnel does. I have that selected, so now I'm program it from finance to personnel. And then now it needs to change funding sources. So you may have to talk to the individual in your program who's responsible for using Intact for our accounting software if you need to get what the funding source is, or the program monitor. But now if we're going to update this funding source, instead of the starts with, because there's all these different types, we might need to use the like option. Are there any funding source costs that have the word personnel in any point of this name? That brings us to 3 different funding sources. And now I can select the appropriate one. And now the timesheet for this day has been updated to reflect the change in program that occurred on my profile during the middle of the pay period. I hit save, and now this day would record this 8 hours toward the personnel office, and all the time before then would still be recording to finance unless I go and change each day. If you have questions, please use the chat box on the bottom of your screen. To help make this easier for you, because some programs have multiple sources of funds, and unless the employee is being limited to a list of certain funds and programs, you can reach out to the program monitor who can build a list that the employee can only have accessed on their timesheet. Because my payroll profile doesn't have any limitation, any program can be selected to charge payroll to. And that includes for you as the user. You're not restricted to a certain program, checkbook, or funding source. That's selectable at any point unless the program monitor can update the profile for each of the employees to limit the number of checkbooks or programs or funding sources you can select from, which would make your job a whole lot easier in trying to figure out where you're supposed to charge an employee if they get paid from multiple sources of funds and you need to record that on the timesheet. Some of our grants, we are required to record our time and charge time appropriately to each funding source based on how we're working. If we work 2 hours today on one fund and the remainder of the day on a different fund, our timesheet may have to include that. And so we can take the same steps that we're looking at here, where if I'm on the clock from 7 to 5 and my default profile says I'm being charged to personnel, we can add a second line and say, you know what, from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m., I was working for a different source of funds. So personnel has general funds. We'll use that like option and look for any fund that has the word personnel in it. So here's their general fund money. And so if these were two different grants, and for 2 hours this morning, I worked towards this grant, and the remainder of the day was to the rest of the grant, I have that now recorded and reflected on my timesheet. So that when the timesheet is processed and those expenses are moved into our accounting system, it would be accounted for correctly. And we can do this with each and every day. And that's if our time varies by how we work towards each grant. If it's the same, we have some employees that work 50% or they're charged 50% to one fund, charged 50% to another fund. We can assign what's called a labor distribution so that regardless of what the timesheet says, when the accounting for that person's payroll is brought into our accounting system, it's going to split the time 50% to one and 50% to the other every single time. And that's called a labor distribution. So if you have employees who work for multiple grants and it has to be split evenly every pay period amongst different funding sources, you can work with the program monitor on getting that set up in the employee profile. And typically that's going to be through or shown on the employee's personnel action form. So in addition to being able to edit each day, we can also do this as a mass edit rather than having to go through each day of the person's timesheet and then make that change to show that I'm now in the payroll in the personnel office starting July 15th through the rest of the pay period. If I need to make that change for not just one person, multiple people, or multiple days, we can go to our menu, go to the admin settings wheel, and you'll have an option that says mass edit, and then a variety of options to mass edit. And one of those things we'll look at is editing time entries. You'll have one that says mass edit, edit time entry. When we come to this time, or to this page, just like timesheets, what's going to be on screen are the list of employees assigned to you. We're editing time entries, so we've got mass edit time entries is where we navigated to. So on screen, I've had this default to me again. It's going to default to showing just today. If I needed to change this whole pay period, so I've got current pay period selected, and I refresh this page. Here's a list of all of my timesheet entries for this pay period so far. Currently, everything is recorded to finance. We see that at the end when I scroll the screen since I've got this zoomed in. If the whole timesheet was supposed to go to personnel because I started personnel at the beginning of this pay period, that's not going to be shown here yet if my time or my profile wasn't updated until today, because this information has already been recorded. I have to update the timesheet. So I can select all of those entries. So now everything has a check mark, and we can say mass edit the time entry. And I can choose those cost centers to where if my program's going to change, we'll hit the magnifying glass and find my program personnel. My funding source is going to change. So we'll hit that magnifying glass. We'll use the like option and say anything that has used the word personnel. So there's that indirect cost one again for personnel. And I hit that, and I've got those two things selected. If I hit apply change, it'd take a minute, but all entries on my timesheet would update from being billed to finance to now being billed to personnel. And that would have taken just a minute to do instead of having to edit each day on someone's timesheet. And if we experience that with our all of our staff, if we have grants change as one grant expires and comes to an end and our new grant is starting, we might have to make this change on a timesheet depending on the period when that happens. And we can do that through the mass edit of time entries and quickly and easily save a lot of time and heartache for us in trying to do this, or save some accounting problems later when the outgoing funding source is charged, not the new funding source. And that's the mass edit time entries option. We also have the ability to mass edit add a time entry. So like today with SNETP closing at noon, maybe Alma or Lori do not want to update each individual timesheet to add admin leave. So they can select on the page or one by one from their employees affected by closure, click to mass edit time entries and say, today from 1 to 5, oops, from 1 to 5 p.m., we're going to have admin leave because we're closing. And we might include that as a note that we have approved admin leave because of air conditioning issues. We wouldn't have to change anything else. Our employees are already going to be signed to a certain checkbook program and funding source, so we can leave that blank. We don't use the jobs field, so we're going to leave that blank. Our time off is already assigned a pay category, so we're not going to change that either. We don't use shift premiums in this, so we're not going to select a shift premium. We're all in one time zone, so we're not going to override the time zone. So all we're going to say is for all those employees on the page, for one day on July 15th, from the hours of 1 to 5, we want to add admin leave. And if we leave that note, everybody's timesheet will be updated to include that admin leave for this reason. And all it would take is hitting that button. It would take a minute to upload and we're done. And so those are two powerful tools we can use to manage our employees' timesheets, especially when we have a lot of changes that need to be made or the same change across a lot of different employees. Are there any questions about mass adding time or mass editing timesheets? Okay, if you have questions, just feel free to ask, but we'll move on to personnel action requests. When a PA is processed for an employee, may trigger the need to update where an employee gets paid from, their funding source, their program, their checkbook. When the cost center information is updated, the update begins with the next entry. If we've already recorded time on our timesheet, we've already recorded a holiday, we've already submitted a time off request, all of that stuff will still keep the old information. So this means that any timesheet information already created or is pending approval, we're going to have to update that information too. So if we update the employee's profile today to look at that change that LJ has gone from the finance office to the personnel office, if that's supposed to be reflected on any other days outside of starting today, those entries for the pay period leading up today have to be updated by the department or by the program. So we've seen how we can do that by editing each day on a timesheet, or we can mass edit to save time and just make it easier for us to handle. So because it does not change the cost center for any recorded time entries that have already been posted or are pending, this may also trigger some things that have to happen. If I had requested time off in the month of August, even though I'm updating the timesheet today, or I'm updating the profile today to change from being paid from finance to personnel, that August record has already been posted as being paid from finance. So we'll have to keep an eye out on the stuff we've already recorded for employees if the cost centers change. If there's a request pending, I have a request in August to take time off, but I put in that request while I worked in finance, and now I'm in the personnel office. Our best route to go is to reject that request and then ask for a new one to be submitted now that my profile says I get paid from personnel. So processing our personnel action request doesn't fix everything for us. It'll fix that person's profile going forward, but not anything already recorded. So make sure as we're processing those and it's communicated to you, the personnel action form has updated the employee. We double check those timesheets and all of those entries to make sure it's reflected how we expect that person to be charged to our budgets. Thank you everybody for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.